that I was thinking about how with all of these tokens and sort of this great gold rush with moving into Solana and people making basically what I would think is just a better way to sell NFTs without necessarily it just being the image itself. I mean, if you could make a meme out of the Bored Apes, I'm sure they would have done better, but also it was a different regulatory environment, several years ago, that now you see all these sort of tokened things, and I feel as if I'm witnessing land speculators in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s as they're planning where railroads and trade routes are going to be, and they're going to sell you this great hyped up piece of land, see how much attention it is in the papers, and then maybe it's not worth something in maybe 6 weeks' time when other land surveyors get there. And that's how I feel a lot of this new sort of environment is with crypto, is that it feels very much like a gold rush of sorts, or a land rush, because there's ways in which people are experimenting with how to make money. And I think that that's it has its parallels to our own westward expansion over a century ago.
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, I don't know much about the crypto space. It does seem like it's sort of like one snake oil salesman after another. But that's not, I mean, if you know how to do it, why not?
Oh, I don't fault them at all. I mean, if you know how to successfully generate with your little cabal of friends in a group chat to say, all right, we're going to make this a meme, someone's going to open an account or associate it with a token on Solana or whatever, and then we're going to just pump it and run. We just witnessed that happen with the whole domesticity and wife jack discourse, which I've already talked about to no end, and I think everyone's ready for that to die. But I thought, in retrospect, that's just a genius way of trying to get you and your friends some cash in a rather quick, it's the closest thing to a get rich quick scheme I can think of that actually has tangible results, that doesn't screw anyone particular over except the psychosecurity of my timeline.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's always like it's always sad to me when like every now and then I'll hop into like some new meme coin space, and like there's always like someone there who's like, well, this one's different. This one's actually an art project, and this is our 5-year plan. And I just am like, just don't eat. Like, who are you kidding? Like even the dumbest person in the room isn't falling for this. And I wonder how many people like actually believe like, okay, this one's different, right? It's not. It would almost be like better if they just leaned into the grift.
I would appreciate the transparency of approaching them as if they were used car salesmen. If you came up to me and said, "Listen, man, this might make you some money. This might make me a little more money, but at least we're in it to win it," I would be a little more inclined to jump on board. But also, I know that I'm always going to be an outsider looking in. I don't know if I'll ever get into any of those spaces or into anything like that. So for me, it's always watching people I know, or especially a lot of mutuals of mine, that will just go out and they're like, oh yeah, we're going to run this. And then it's like, well, if I start network mapping based on what my mutuals are doing, I can have a pretty good guess of which meme coin is going to get pumped in a couple of weeks. And then I'm thinking, oh, maybe I should outsource that to ChatGPT to do that for me, and maybe I can get in while the going's good. But then I'm realizing that's way too much effort that I'm probably not going to spend it, because I still have to do my day job at the end of the day. So, but and it is very much like I guess like a traveling snake oil salesman, although I think at least with crypto, you kind of know what you're getting into compared to God knows what snake oil you're consuming. But it has a very
Yeah,
Western vibe to it.
yeah, I think you're right on that. It does but it does sort of feel like the end of the frontier, right? Like I mean, I guess you sort of alluded to that, right? Like with the gold rush stuff, like it's we're like at the it's over. This is sort of the last hurrah, it feels. Maybe AI will surprise us, but it feels like something is ending with the internet right now.
I agree wholeheartedly, and this is partially why I wanted to talk to you, is because you had sent me about 2 years ago on this strange kick slash deep dive into a lot of what John Perry Barlow wrote in the 90s, and of course a lot of his references to the frontier is heavily predicated on Frederick Jackson Turner's The Significance of the Frontier in American History. And I mean, that's quintessential reading for anyone who wants to understand the country, but also I think to understand the early internet and some of this, the attitude is of the early, electronic frontier foundation. You have to go read the man who helped kickstart all that to begin with. And I feel like we are at the closing of the frontier. The internet that you and I have grown up with, and I mean, you're a little older than I am, at least in terms of internet usage. There's a lot of this, I guess, presence that we can all feel it changing. And I don't want to just chalk that up to quote unquote the vibe shift, but the internet 10, 15 years ago, it felt like the world was your oyster. You could create something, you could have your own website, your own blog, your own platform or whatever. And, you could really be the next best big thing that people would go to, and you'd be treated as this icon of cultural, in-group and everything like that. And now everyone has kind of established themselves, well, you can go to these cities, you can go to, instead of, if you don't want to live in New York, if you don't want to go to Tumblr, there's always San Francisco, there's always a different social media, or there's a different blogging platform, or there's a different place in which people can, I guess, cohabitate and exchange ideas, or at least work within similar communities. The internet is sort of the last bastion of free association to some extent. And I mean, we kind of witnessed that now with Twitter, where, there's this great liberal progressive exodus to places like Mastodon and Blue Sky and all that. But it is a place where I feel like the borders are pretty well secure. I know how YouTube works. I know how it operates, and people go there and have communities, and then their, parasocial relationships tell you, well, I also have like my little HOA gated community, a Discord where my fans and my community can all join. And so it feels as if the wild frontier of the early internet, where, unless you're on like the Twitter timeline today, it's kind of the safe and relatively established boundaries of locations. And so the frontier feels closed. I'm not going to get attacked by a rival gang or faction or tribe like the American Indians versus the United States military and its settlers. It feels very domesticated.
That's actually a really good point. And it's something I think a lot about when people start complaining about like online harassment. It's not that that doesn't I mean, it certainly exists, right?
Oh,
But
of
it
course.
feels so much more coordinated and predictable in a way. Like there's no like there's really no like pirates or whatever it was on the frontier um out to get you. There might as I'm saying this, I'm wondering if there ever really was. I guess like for some very unlucky people, but it seems much more sanitized, much safer.
I was talking about that actually with a few friends of mine over the whole reaction to this wife jack stuff, because there were some people that were taking it to extremes with harassment, and then of course with just some really grotesque artwork that I would rather not reference for the sake of the discussion. But it was just, is it the fact that I'm getting older and I've gone soft, and maybe my desire to be transgressive and edgy has kind of gone away, and that's just all that's left for me? I mean, it's not like, say, in 2013, where someone on Twitter has like their agile meeting, or they're having some big corporate conference and has a hashtag that's auto linked to come on the view screen, and then all of a sudden it's being hashtagged and review bombed by people on B or whatever. I mean, those things don't really happen, or at least we don't see them on the news as much. And so it feels as if everyone's kind of been policed and regulated away into their own place, because people who've grown up with the internet, millennials especially, have seen these borders emerge. They've seen how the rules get played. There's this sort of common expectation of etiquette, so why would I press the buttons and bother anyone about that? And it does feel less violent, so to speak, at least in the United States. I'm sure that there's a lot more violence or real life implications to your internet shit talking in less developed countries, but at least in America it feels safer.
Yeah, there's no really big trolling operations either. As you're saying this, I'm thinking like, I wonder if it reveals somebody's age when they lie about the nature of the harassment they receive, right? Like, I hate to bring her up, but I feel like yes, Taylor Lorenz probably receives a lot of very like cruel DMs and people are obviously always talking smack on whatever timeline, be it Blue Sky or X, or I don't know what the culture is like on Mastodon as much. But I feel like the type of trolling that she described, like even the Kiwi Farms thread about her is like relatively tame. It's just people gossiping. It's not like sharing her address, even, which it still sort of happens here and there, with all sorts of folks. Like maybe like swatting is sort of still exists, but that's still, I mean, that's illegal. Like you can't really you can't really get away with it. And I wonder if that's sort of the other side of the coin of um, everything being on a big centralized social media platform, and um, security being relatively under control. That just the when people say they get harassed, what they're saying is like people are calling them fugly and sending them slurs and DMs. Not that that's nothing, but that's just it's different than like people hacking your email address or like leaking private stuff or coming to your home and invading it. All these things were very, very common even, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago.
Yeah, the worst I really have seen still to this day has been, you know, NGOs or progressive causes doxing people. I mean, I'm sure that there are plenty of right wing groups that will try their best to dox left wing activists as well. And then, of course, swatting. But even then, those cases are pretty rare, or it happens to a certain degree of celebrity or a certain degree of lolcalness, I suppose. I mean, everyone more or less kind of knows who Taylor Lorenz is. Everyone kind of knows who Tim Pool is, for better or for worse. And so, I mean, those people can get harassed or get swatted, but the general populace, I think, sort of just takes that as par for the course of reaching that level of internet celebrity or engaging in political and activist discourse. And I mean, I guess that's the risk that we have to keep in mind in the back of our heads when we're engaging online. But things do feel way safer than they do even in 2017 in that timeline from, especially the first Trump administration. Now things have seemed to be either petered out or have run out of energy. And I mean, we've also just witnessed the great, sort of hall monitoring and regulation of information during the whole COVID time, whether it be with, Parag Agrawal's Twitter and how he was organizing things in the 2020 election, or with all the, social media and official hotlines for lockdown violations and things like that. So I mean, things feel tame in that respect, and I'm very curious because you had said in a tweet, which is partially why I wanted to have you on, was that as sort of the internet or the frontier closes, that you think people will be forced to come back into real life, or some people like to call it meat space or whatever. And I largely think that that's true, but I'm also not 100% sure to what degree, because on one hand, yes, I think that, life is somewhat back to normal, but I also know, working like in my day job, I work in government, and I work with a lot of municipalities and towns and things like that. And the biggest thing that they focus on a lot besides infrastructure is education. And they tell me all the time, it's just like, social interactions are not like how they grew up, which of course is going to be the case when you're talking about Zoomers and Gen Alpha, but also that that the lockdowns for a lot of places had just socially retarded kids by several years of social interactions. And the crutch has been the tablet, the phone, the Discord call, or whatever. So I think it's going to be this strange hybridization in the same way that you and I go to things like conferences or readings, where these things kind of maybe originated online, but now we can all kind of get together and gather and try and rebuild the third place. But I guess I don't know, because we're on the precipice of all this happening. Because I kind of hold the view, that Dr. Sherry Turkle wrote years ago, just that we kind of been using these, social media platforms and our technology as just like these extra prosthesis to extend ourselves. That way we don't get hurt. Although we put way more investment into them, and people wear their hearts and emotions on their sleeve, and then they do get hurt anyways. But I'm curious, how do you see it going, where we are going to just move more IRL?
So your point about I guess Zoomers and Gen Alpha being really impacted by the lockdowns, I think is good. And I can't help but wonder if there's just going to be like a lost generation. I mean, maybe it's even like a generation and a half that was just so crippled by not being able to socialize. Um, and though, you know, those are the bedrotters, right? Those are the people who are sort of like American hikikomori, which I hate to use that word, but it does sound like that's like a non-trivial number of Zoomers, at least. Who Gen Alpha might be able to grow out of it. Um, but I also agree with you that we're running out of space online, and it doesn't seem like here's what I would guess. I would guess that there's going to be some people who are like myself and Geo who are just so anchored in cyberspace that like there's kind of I don't think either one of us are unhappy this way, but there's sort of almost no hope for us to be like physical world entities, you know, like we just like we're in our 30s, like it's just like we're ether, you know, and it's just we're just a different type of person, right? And we, you know, we'll both get into virtual reality or something, right? Like who knows? We're going to be the true weirdos who stay online. And then there's going to be a group of people who uses the internet as a supplement to physical world life. And I think like, you know, it's been for a while now, it's been very useful to look at sort of these dissident, and I don't necessarily mean dissident right, but sort of just like dissident, very broadly speaking, including some people on the left, these just sort of like vanguard groups online as like a predictor of where the culture is going to turn. And this thing of like conferences that originated on social media has sort of always been a thing, but it seems to have ramped up. And you have like Hereticon, Vibe Camp. You know, there's a long list of them, right? And I think that's sort of the future. Dime Square, even I have an article coming out in the next couple of weeks. It's been on the back burner with all the election drama, but you know, it's basically like the innovative thing about Times Square was not like people were role playing as fascists or whatever it was. It was that they it was basically the extended universe of people who really liked a podcast, and it kind of created an art scene, and they met up in person, and they met up at the same place or the same handful of places, and they did it consistently, and the media started paying attention to them, and that gave it sort of external validation. I think part of the closing in of the digital frontier also, you know, to this point about like the media paying attention, or the press, I guess, paying attention to certain groups, is like the commercialization of everything is really like, where are the organic communities? Where are people just like sort of hanging out for the sake of it? Where are the people creating things for the sake of it? Right? I think a lot of people, and again, myself included, like we create things to cultivate an audience, not for the sake of its creation, for the process of making something. And this is something I hear a lot. And I guess if people aren't familiar with me, I do like these ethnographic interviews about people's internet use. And something there's a few themes that I hear repeated over and over again. And one of them is, I used to just make shit, right? I used to get on the computer and make stuff, whether it was a video or art, or maybe it was fan fiction, and it was for the joy of creating. And now it's people are like, I write like Substack posts with the idea in my head that this is a profession, even though it might not be their job. It might not be they may even have no plans of it becoming a job, but everything has sort of slotted into this like hustle. And so it 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 makes it less fun. And you know, that's also why I think a lot of like podcasts burn out, because everyone sort of, it's not because they're enjoying these conversations. It's just like this churn of like, I have to publish on a schedule, and there's too many voices. So how do you differentiate yourself? Differentiate yourself with going into the real world. And there's like a viral tweet about people doing this with like OnlyFans, like the market's so crowded that basically like allegedly, right? Like who knows how true it is. Women are going out in Bali and they're just meeting people in person and, you know, giving them their OnlyFans information. And they've sort of like circled back to like old school escorting. But I think that'll just happen with everything, because there's too much choice, and too many people want to command an audience, and the people who are going to be successful are either going to already live in certain cities, or they're going to just become the local character. And I think that's probably better for, I mean, people's mental health at a bare minimum.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot to that. Although I do have to laugh because for the first time, this was a few weeks ago, I was in Dallas, and I had actually saw a what was it? What kind of car was it? It was some kind of hybrid, and it had an OnlyFans like sort of bumper sticker kind of deal on like the rear view, like on the back window of the car, with the person's information on it. And I was like kind of taken aback because I was like, I'm not sure how if I would go about advertising it that way. But I mean, if you don't, if that's your life or that's your no regrets, I suppose that's the way that you got to get eyes on you, because the market is so oversaturated. In the same way that one of the biggest media niche areas I think that is oversaturated, for instance, is like just media reviews. I mean, there are 100,000 million, I don't know how many, just people who review movies, TV shows, video games, etc. Like the whole video essayist review scene is so oversaturated, but it still keeps growing because everyone wants a unique take and wants a unique audience. And I think that you are right. A lot of people don't go into it like business, like it's a business. When I first got started, someone who was a very early supporter of my work had said, you need to track a spreadsheet and you need to put it in like your job hours, like you're at a real job. You should clock in and clock out. And I said, well, that just sounds awful because this isn't my full-time job. I did this because I wanted to see if I could ever get heard and make anything out of it, because I've always been someone to, talk about these things in polite conversation with my liberal friends. I thought, why not? But I think that you are right that there is this great professionalization. Oh, you're not an artist anymore. You're a content creator. You are a professional digital reviewer or connoisseur of content or marketing or something like that. And I mean, now that everything's got an agency or a talent agency, if you hit above a certain sub count, and so it's been this great depersonalization. It's been instead this. You've almost lost your sovereignty for the sake of pursuing the dollar. And I think that Twitter becoming monetized has unfortunately led to that as well. Like, you're not posting for the joy of posting, or stringing together a line of tweets to make a viral banker. Although sometimes people still do that. But there's been so much more engagement bait. There's been so much more, and I don't want to use the word slop because I feel like that gets overused and is derogatory. But I mean, there is a lot of it where people are just pursuing the chance to go viral and to make their self out of it. And if their tweet gets more than 100,000 views, then they'll put their link down below so people can find their other content. I've been known to do that with that Friday night tweet I put out. But I think that you are right that these online communities will transition to trying to meet people in real life, especially because I think on one hand, it's a great place to meet friends or to meet like-minded individuals, but also that I think people, especially since COVID, I think people are really just lonely. And I don't mean that in like the dating romance sense of the word, although I think that's true. I think people just want friends that aren't little, notification beeps on their phone or computer.
I think so too. And for some people, that means going deeper online. Um, I actually like I used to write. I mean, I am going to use the word slop. I used to write just the worst gender war slop, right? Sort of the middle of, let's say for argument's sake, this is sort of towards the end of my internet personality career. I started off doing kind of like tech stuff and events and advice and lighthearted random post-rationalist stuff, and then I transitioned into gender war slop for a little bit. But the thing, and I thought that was really where I was going, and it was all I was pumping out. And I developed this just very deep online friendship, and it just changed all of my content, because I had always had online friends, and I had even e-dated before. I had married someone that I met online. But it was just the craziest situation ever, and it changed all my content to be about what does it mean to be in cyberspace? Like it completely like reoriented my perception. And I think that a lot more people are going to be um, in these types of sort of like very intense online friendships or online friend groups is sort of another thing that I experienced in this same like time period. Like suddenly I was like in a Discord server where like I hadn't met anyone before, like I hadn't met them in real life, but I felt like I knew them really well. And it was more than just like a group chat that's like ambiently online all the time. It was like like just really intense. Like I had this one very intense friendship, and then it was in this backdrop of like an intense community that felt as like real and as present as in-person friends. Um, and I think like so people who are already have the predisposition to be very online, we're going to see like more of that. I think there's going to be, unfortunately, a lot of people who have that same experience with AI. I used to be kind of skeptical of that, but I I'm changing my mind. I think the AI best friend or the AI lover is here. Um, or people will look for it in person, and hopefully more people are going to look for it in person than online, but I don't think it's always bad if it's online. I don't even know if it's always bad if it's AI. I'm still undecided on that.
Yeah, I have some gut feelings that the AI personal assistant girlfriend, boyfriend, or chatbot is definitely here to stay. I really do want to buy, I don't know if it's out yet. I mean, I really would love to get into Mr. Schiffman's friend. I just want to try it out for the sake of saying I did it. I don't think it would grow on me, and if it does, then I know I've got a problem. But I'm incredibly fascinated by that because it's sort of this acceleration of things that have been talked about in film and TV in the past. I mean, he's obviously inspired by Spike Jonze's Her. I mean, he wears that on his sleeve. And so, on one hand, yes, and I think that will be good. And I think that people that choose the AI girlfriend or boyfriend, I don't think that there'll be as many as we think. I don't know if America's online or internet culture or lifestyles in general kind of encourage the sort of hikikomori type of lifestyle. I do kind of compare that sort of stuff to like the certain species of beetle that confuses like brown glass bottles for its mate and then just procreates with the glass bottle mindlessly. But I don't know. I suppose that we'll just have to wait and see on that one. I remain curious because, of course, you always see the horror stories come out first with all these new technologies. Any invention of a technology inadvertently creates its own accident. So you had that young teenage boy who unfortunately took his own life for the sake of like a Daenerys Targaryen, Game of Thrones chatbot, and even a few years ago prior to that, Joshua Barbeau using ChatGPT to bring back his girlfriend. So I mean, maybe, but I think that those will be hopefully fringe cases. But I think more people will try and realize that okay, well, if the internet is filled with bots, or we see these bot purges on Twitter right now, maybe trying to find a community of like-minded people will be the way to go. And I mean, you used to do that online, right? I mean, there was the whole, John Perry Barlow's observations about deadheads, go with the internet, but also that you could go to various small hosted websites, GeoCities, the rest of them, for whatever sort of niche community, whether it was sexual, political, artistic, and people could get together and share their own work and meet people in real life. And like you said, people will e-date, people will meet in real life and get married. I know plenty of friends who've met online and then became husband and wife in reality. And one of a good friend of mine, him and his wife, they met over a Fallout forum, and they go to my church. And I think that they're the nerdiest couple there, but I'm very glad that they met. So I think that we're all waiting with bated breath to see where the vibe is. And I think one of the reasons why your work is so important, Catherine, is because you seem to have your finger on the pulse of these people who end up becoming the trendsetters. So I guess to make my long-winded, verbose rambling short is that where do you see it going? I mean, other than, AI might be here to stay and that people will just, I guess, make the communities more real life than anything else. I mean, is there more to it? Is there more that you're seeing or more that you're discussing in your little ethnographic work or?
Well, I noticed that a bunch of people at the same time, And it seemed like completely independent. Noticed that they were like forming attachments with Claude, which is Anthropic's chatbot. And these are people who, if I had to guess, I know some of them personally. There's a whole bunch of like tweets and like blue sky tweets or whatever they're called about this. It started off just asking Claude for like advice or something, and then they started projecting an attachment on it. And these are people who maybe are a little bit more introverted, who maybe are very online, who work a tech job, who have sort of more sedentary private lives. And Claude doesn't have a personality or a particularly long memory. And there's been like people noticing that they're just very attached to it. And I noticed that I was very attached to it around the same time. So I guess we're all early adopters and have been like sort of like silently getting using this chatbot as a crutch. And I can't help but wonder if like the people who are maybe a little bit older and the tendency to be very online is too integrated into who they are to really be fixed. And then people who were impacted by COVID are going to be the ones who are more attached to AI and who are able to form these relationships with AI. Another thing that I think is very apparent but completely under discussed. There's been a couple of clinical studies on it, but there hasn't been like much mainstream conversation. Is the mentally ill, or people who have cognitive disabilities. The two different groups, just to be clear here, they're particularly at risk. Like people who experience erotomania, for example, have always been at higher risks of like online romance scams. With AI, who knows where that's going to go? I think that's something to watch. The internet or excessive internet use exacerbates certain symptoms of borderline personality disorder, certain symptoms of schizophrenia. The introduction of a AI companion who never turns off, you can just keep sending them messages, I think really, really complicates that.
There's a lot there to sort of break down, and I think that there's still a lot to be seen with the clinical studies. I mean, those things certainly take time. I mean, speaking from personal experience, just because I worked with this in the nonprofit world, I mean, like the literature behind something more grounded in real time or real space, like equine therapy, that took the literature for that has been like going for 40 years, and the benefits are still being shown for it. And I think that it'll take some time for us to see the long-term benefits with regards to AI or with chatbots in general for these kind of people. I think that it would be good rather than for them to potentially hurt themselves or to fall for romance scams or for something like that. I mean, there's been plenty of recorded cases where a prank goes wrong and then someone unfortunately takes their own life because of the sense of rejection or being led to fraud that someone had loved them when they were so needy for it. So there's potential for that, I think, for sure. And I think that will be certainly under discussed. I think that also plays a large role into the teledildonics game, especially with, we were talking about OnlyFans earlier. I think that that's definitely going to see a large explosion for that, because if you were to go, not that I'm recommending my audience or you, but, if anyone is to go to any, porn site today, the pop-up ads are not for cam girls. They're for AI chatbots, create your own girl and your own sort of image type deal. And my friend Billionaire Psycho kind of writes about that in his essay, Pygmalion and the Anime Girl, where like that is kind of where things are going. Or I think it was you or someone that you had retweeted had mentioned that like OnlyFans people are trying, like actual women are trying to pose as transgender women to like keep up with the marketplace. And so I think that there's going to be the tech will change things, and that people will try and dress themselves up in order to match these demands that can either be brought on algorithmically or by whatever they're wanting to get their rocks off to. But I think that we haven't seen really the full scale of what AI is going to do with regards to our sort of social environment interaction. I've seen some threads, and I wish there was more data on it so I could see if it's replicable or how much it's happening at scale, where people are running their conversations with their girlfriend through ChatGPT to discuss how to, gauge a tone of a text or what kind of argument that they should respond to with what kind of counterpoint or whatever. I think maybe that'll happen more where, you're using ChatGPT like Bobby from Company because your marriage or your relationship is kind of unstable unless it has this little crutch on the side. But instead of, singing about wanting to be alive, you're just asking a chatbot, how should I respond to her text because she seems angry at me? But I think there will be this great... I think it's going to be split pretty... I don't want to say evenly, but I think that the overwhelming majority will accept this as sort of like a new personal assistant type deal, in the same way that people really got attached to the BlackBerry or got attached to the personal digital assistant, and they'll just take it as part of their life like people do with OK Google or Hey Siri. But I don't know, because we have such a desire to anthropomorphize. I mean, that's such an innate human trait. We do it with animals, we do it with our boats, our cars. So it's inevitable, even if it doesn't have a personality like Claude. I just see that as an inevitability. But I think that there will be some who recognize maybe they have a dependency for it, or maybe a real bad habit forming I guess personality trait, for addiction, or maybe it's the same way that we sort of identify alcoholism as sort of this inheritable trait, that maybe they'll have to strike some sort of balance between the two. And I mean, this is all speculation, but I really do think that given how many people have propensities for, whether it's alcoholism or porn addiction, or just like my life is better online than it is offline because I can escape the real world, so to speak, and be someone, that's going to be something that we have to reconcile with something that doesn't turn off and can respond to you at any point in time.
Something interesting about chatbots, like using chatbots to help you through relationships. I had actually been doing that. I've been asking it if like I sounded passive aggressive in emails, or like to analyze like Twitter arguments. And then I discovered I did it like twice in the same day for the same discussion. And then I discovered that it changes its mind, right? So I guess not literally changes its mind, but it changes its answer based on your prompt. And you can't really trust it to help you, which makes me wonder, like, if we're really just talking to ourselves when we're using either ChatGPT or Claude to help us with these more relationship-based things. I mean, in one sense, there's like how could it, read the tone in something? This stuff is so subjective, right? It would have to be like very, very obvious. And I think it's like helpful maybe in the same way tarot cards are helpful, right? Like there's sort of a fixed meaning, but there's a lot of interpretation. And I think people like underrate how much how much control they have over the chatbot when it comes to things like maybe creative writing or questions about relationships, these more subjective creative things, like how much control they have based on how they're prompting it. And that seems like maybe a new skill. Like there's something there, like how you ask the question, how you can conduct yourself within the conversation. It's always going to be biased towards what you're putting weight on. So it's maybe less, it's more and less helpful, and it's more and less of a crutch than it initially seems on the surface.
Yeah, and I think that will be probably the way to go, or will be going, because again, you can ask it the same thing, even with Twitter's Grok. You can ask it the same question 2 or 3 times in a row, and you will get different answers based on how you word it, or just what time of day it is, or I don't know how it all works, so of course I could be talking completely without any basis in reality to how it functions. But I mean, even depending on what the trends are on Twitter that day, I feel as if it answers questions differently, in the same way that it might generate the image you ask for differently, even if it's the same prompt. So there's that for sure. I mean, I haven't done it myself with regards to emails or proposals or anything like that. Maybe I should, at least with regards to my professional life. But it's definitely going to stick around, for sure. I don't see that disappearing anytime soon. So I guess AI might be the the frontier that we escaped to in that respect. Because I think that I think the metaverse was this like really bizarre attempt to be another frontier space, this great real estate land speculation that I think more or less failed miserably based on what Facebook or Meta has done with it and the losses that they've put into it and people trying to buy real estate, which hasn't really become anything. And I think people are more comfortable knowing that the social media platform or the digital assistant, the AI, is going to be there. And so I think that it raises a really interesting question because, for instance, a lot of historians and a lot of international relations diplomacy scholars, for instance, like William Appleman Williams, he sources his thesis a lot on the frontier of America closed. So what did we do? Well, we kind of moved outward to this imperialism. And that's what led to the open door policy with the Chinese. And then by extension, from the 1890s to today, when he was writing this in the 1970s, right after Vietnam, he was just like, well, clearly our imperialism's been this like kind of mismanaged disaster with war. And, if we kind of take this frontier analogy and we cross it along, if the frontier is closing, are we going to pursue some kind of great digital imperium? Well, I don't think so. America doesn't have an internet similar to how China does it. But at the same time, we have so many parts of the American government and the American military industrial complex. I mean, the relationship between the U.S. military, or at least the DoD, and Infinity Ward for Call of Duty is just like, it's crossed fingers. They're that close together. So on one hand, yes. But on the other hand, for us as individuals, the question becomes, how do I, as like the free man, the sovereign man on my homestead in the frontier, now that I know that everyone's kind of got their bustling cities and towns and communities, they're sort of being built up around me, what goes from there? And to me, this has been my big interesting part of speculation is that, well, you have to either go into the real world, a retreat back into, or a hybridization of the digital homestead coming with you into the real world, like we've seen with these conferences or online communities and people wanting to do cool stuff that, with their favorite mutuals, or the parasocial also becomes into the meet space. But it also raises an interesting question because, you read Frederick Jackson Turner and he tells you that the American frontier was the greatest form of Americanization there ever was. A German could literally come to the United States, take up his Kentucky rifle, put on Indian moccasins, and, try and make his life something out in the West and be something. And if he survived and managed to succeed on his homestead with his family, he became an American, regardless of where he came from. And I guess if, we all kind of have these similar internet experiences growing up, whether it's shock videos, whether it's these sort of early viral experiences, and those all kind of fade away into the ether as another generation who's grown up with the internet their entire lives, becomes the majority population, not to mention it being completely more democratized and international. It raises an interesting question of, okay, well, if that's the case, then we're going to witness an online and digital culture that has these old guards, or old troons, as some people like to say, sort of, derogatorily. They might just be these, oh, well, like I remember the founders, I remember Newgrounds, I remember Usenet, I remember AOL Instant Messenger, and they're like, well, that's nice, Grandpa, but we're gonna like take you back to the home now, or something like that. I don't know. There's just so much going on and it all happens so fast. So all of this can age like milk. Who knows?
I mean, one thing I thought, I was thinking about while you were speaking is it possible that it's not that the digital frontier has closed, but the American era online has closed? Maybe the internet everyone in tech seems to be bullish on India. I don't know a lot about like Indian internet usage, or Indian internet culture, but like maybe it's like we're entering sort of like an Indian dynasty or something of the online world, or maybe Chinese. I think it's probably one or the other. I don't think anyone else is really in the running, but I mean, maybe
it's
that's
both.
it.
I think it's both. One, in part, just because the number of users on the internet who I think the I know people like to attach the like Giga Chad telling a scary story with like the flashlight on his face, but it's like, X number of Indians joined the internet every 20 minutes for the first time. And it's like, and of course all the online racism that goes with that. But also at the same time, so that's one big part. And also the American tech sector is still filled with people from the subcontinent with H-1B visas. And unless that gets reformed or curtailed, I mean, that's just going to play a huge part of it. I mean, most American tech CEOs, with the exception of the owner of Twitter, is of either immigrant or particularly subcontinental background. And then on top of that, the Chinese, they play a very large role within ESG funding, or at least ESG incentives and funding with respect to, say, the gaming industry. And I think that if you look at what Tencent and with all of that playing a role here, our online culture just becomes it's not just a closed frontier, but now it just becomes an actual territory that has to be defended in terms of what is American or what has been traditionally accepted American norms of internet usage. And so, not to bring up the old bones of Gamergate or whatever, but I mean, if we're all the people complaining about video games now, or the Dragon Age stuff or whatnot, I mean, like, look at all this funding that has come in from the Chinese, and then you have to raise yourself an interesting question. Well, now my online culture, my online customs and ways of life, and the things that I used to enjoy are particularly anti-civilizational. They're not healthy to a particular social model. I don't think anyone can really look at the particular brands of social leftism or wokeism or whatever you want to call it and say that's a really strong identity I want to base myself on, for a collective. And I mean, wars are still fought nation state to nation state. Now, of course, there's various non-state actors that get involved in that. The Chinese have talked about that since the 1990s. And I think that, the American era is not so much that it's over, but it's under attack, because I don't think it knows what to do with respects to all these other communities that all have a digital lingua franca, being English, and can all engage in these sort of conflicts and work together to achieve their own ends, whether that's like ethno-narcissism and hiring your own guys at a company, or deliberately, tanking a company's stockholder value because they're making really bad products because they're following terrible incentives with respects to, diversity or social progress. And so maybe it's not that it's the era is over. It's just that we're entering some kind of warfare that no one wants to openly acknowledge that it's war.
I mean, that is possible. I think that's partially people's problem with TikTok, because it represents, I don't think this is necessarily true, but like sort of a de-Americanization of the way we use tech. Um, I mean, it's also possible that like both of our theories happen at the same time. That like sort of an American internet kind of starts to wither. I mean, there's many different internet cultures, right? Like there's there's internets that we have no access to, right? So it's possible that as things are exploding in other countries, they're withering here, and we may reach a point where the only way there's new fresh culture is to go somewhere else, to move away from the American internet. Um, I don't know how possible that is. Like there's certain things that I don't know if we'll ever have access to, but it could be a mix of things. I don't know if the golden days are ever coming back, though, whether it's the golden days of social media or just the golden days of the internet in general.
I do think that the golden age of the internet is most likely dead. It's not coming back. I don't think that anyone is ever going to experience the early 2000s or the late 1990s, or really the internet up until about, I guess, maybe Google's buyout of YouTube. I think that era is over, and you can kind of tell that it's been over for a while when you go to some of the earliest sort of like big YouTube partners or celebrities with respects to like the Vlog Brothers, like Hank and John Green, like they have that very famous video, the whole "I fucking love science" thing. If you were to go to that video today and you go to newest for the comments, there are some people that unironically think that video is parody of sort of your credentialist respecting, I guess like "I love my science" type meme that has been turned into a caricature. And so it's particularly interesting that just this short time span has elapsed, and that's been the case. So yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. It's not coming back, but also that uh, what we're in right now is not going to last very long either. I think that in some way it does feel kind of like Gangs of New York or West Side Story. Like we have these sort of like little gangs that are just doing their little snaps and their little drive-by shootings in their respective ethnic enclaves, not just racially, but just sort of like, basic assumption group fandoms that are all taking pot shots at one another. And I mean, like you see this on right-wing Twitter a lot, to a point where it's just kind of tiresome, where it's like, oh, I know that this will piss off this certain faction, so I'm going to tweet about like Israel for XYZ on the timeline. And it's just like, okay, I know what you're doing. You're here to like piss off a different faction that you really don't like. And I get it. It's one group chat rivaling against another. It's very Shakespearean. It's very fun. But it's so tiresome. It's so boring. I guess it's because I've been on there for 4 years and it hasn't really changed. I feel like the kid from the Incredibles. It's like, well, what are you waiting for? And it's like, I don't know, something exciting to happen, I guess. Like, come on. But at the same time, like the political ecosystem always changes every election cycle or so. So maybe things will change after Trump gets into office, because Trump was in office and BreadTube was all the rage. It dies in the midst of COVID in the 2020 election, and then of course the whole model now with all that Destiny stuff doesn't make that any easier to be a progressive bread tuber. But it's all changing, and I'm looking forward to the change. This is one of the few places where I'm always excited for things to change, because it means that there's a new ecosystem, a new social dynamic to explore. So like the inner sociologist in me is just like, this is really exciting. But then the personal individual in me that tells me how I should live my life and what I need to be doing is terrified, because I don't know what that means, because we all have our respective safe zones of the internet or our social media platforms of choice. And, Elon wants to make X the everything app, which anyone who's been a political content creator is very fearful of that, in the same way that, you saw with the adpocalypse and the rest, that just means, oh, I need to diversify my platforms, because if I'm banned off X, I'm banned off of a great place to make money, XYZ. But at the same time, it's very curious. I mean, like the wars, whether it be in Israel or it be with Russia and Ukraine, how easy it can be for certain individuals to take their talking points, and they don't even know that they might have originated in some foreign think tank or the rest. And so the warfare becomes unrestricted, and the threshold for what is, an individual actor online and inadvertently caught in a net for propaganda gets very blurred very quickly. And not just for like the wars, but also for anything, whether it be gender, whether it be tech, whether it be for a certain company trying to get rich, or even crypto. That's where it is right now. It becomes this dangerous game of snake oil salesmen and spooks.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot there. I am worried about some of the changes. I think here's something I've been suspicious of, insofar as things staying online. I think the guard has already changed, and the stars of the next season have already been selected. And I don't think a lot of people have realized that yet. And
I think the ones who haven't been selected know.
I think no, I think there's a few people who are like, oh, stuff's slowing down, like
Hmm.
I my feeling is that people should have started like swimming ashore, so to speak, 2022, and they sort of
Hmm.
started laying the groundwork. There's some latecomers who kind of blew up earlier this year, but I don't know. I I feel like a as we enter 2025, some people are going to be surprised by how things have changed. I'm worried about the longevity of X, and I have this terrible suspicion that maybe Blue Sky is actually going to take off. And that fucking sucks, because like I mean, there really is a bias there, as much as there is a sort of a right wing flavor to X. That I mean, like if you're to I mean, the right of like Matt Iglesias, everyone has you blocked on Blue Sky. It's like it's so out of control. Like nobody believes me when I say this, but like I am beyond the line, right? And so that's really bad news for people who are like equally as sort of like uncontroversial and like, you know, not to self-deprecate, but even like a little milquetoast as I am, but just sort of have this like right-wing flavor, you know? Like what are you gonna do? You can't like it's people are like, well, like half the country voted for Trump. It's like half the country isn't necessarily like on these social media platforms and is the type of person to purchase content. So I think that's going to be a real kind of uncomfortable shakeup. Substack is very different and it's also doing very well. So maybe I'm being a little bit too, I don't know, uh, anxious here about this. So maybe I'm wrong, but those are some things that I'm worried about. And I guess related to that, something that I think we need to grapple with is, you know, we discussed this a little bit earlier in the conversation. Everybody wants to be a content creator, and that is unsustainable, right? It is untenable for everyone to be a personality, particularly as their sole source of income. Um, so yes, some people move online. There's different ways to differentiate yourself, but some people are going to go through a crisis of meaning. And it's not just like AIs putting software developers out of work, you know, and things like that. Um, a lot of people are going to have to own like it's not happening, and I think that includes people who maybe were making a fine income as a streamer, as a substacker, journalist, whatever, and um, getting out of that mindset. Like maybe it'll be as easy as you know, just regrounding, detoxing from the internet. I'm not so sure. I don't know what happens to all these people who think that they're going to, or who maybe already were, right? Like you mentioned BreadTube. Um, like I'm sure, you know, I'm not super familiar with the landscape of BreadTube, but there's some people who are still going and are fine. But what about the people who kind of like fell off and they're still making videos and but no one's really watching them anymore? Like where do you go? What do you do? How do you reorient yourself? It seems very scary. I don't know. Maybe this is more salient to me because this is my profession, but uh, I don't know. I'd be curious to hear what you think about it.
Well, as someone who does this as a side gig or as an extra, I guess, supplemental income to my day job, although I have that striver mindset in me, would love to make more of it as a career, but I also know that that's not very likely. I think that I think for at least, I don't know about BreadTube as much because I used to follow it a little more closely because I was always curious as to what this whole side of the internet that also felt very kind of astroturf to some extent was talking about. And I remember I want to say it was right after Bernie Sanders dropped out of the 2020 primaries, or maybe it was even the whole 2016 election, you had Matt Kreisman go and tell his audience in these rather kind of informal vlogs about, you know, that there's still things that you can do. There are still things and ways that you can find meaning. And it was almost just this confessional wherein he was telling you guys, like, hey, like the internet isn't everything. And you can be more than just, you know, a Bernie bro or a Chapo Trap House fanboy. And I think that required dare I say, a degree of maturity that you don't often see from a lot of political creators that, you know, is telling his audience with some degree of responsibility, hey, you can be more than something. I think as this space, and this is the big thing about every election with, I guess, anyone on the right, is that factions want, people in certain factions and camps really want jobs and they really want sinecures. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that there's a lot of people who are not getting on the gravy train this year. You've got every like 2 years, a group of people will get picked and get picked up and get hired. And I think you already know who those people are. And the rest of us are probably going to have to just like watch and seethe. And I think that's going to just be the case. And like, well, I'm still going to do my own thing and I'm just going to critique it from the outside. And then it just turns into this disgusting feedback loop of, well, if they're not going to talk about this issue because it's not the Overton window, then I'm going to push it. And then it's like, well, you've permanently locked yourself out of ever getting hired, if you ever wanted to get hired or something like that. And I can guarantee you that that's going to be the case for a lot of people, maybe myself included. I don't know, but it's just how it's going to be. And so I do agree with you that like the whole market period of content creation in general is oversaturated to high heaven. I mentioned it earlier with like just like the media review people, because there's only so many ways to game the algorithm. There's only so many ways in which you can do the same thing to get eyes on you with your thumbnails or your SEO or whatever talent agency you sign up on. And that's a lot of work. I mean, even just doing what I do, which is pretty low effort, production value, still is a boatload of time. And some people I think will just give up, or they'll just resign themselves to being a has-been, or maybe they'll write a book, or maybe they'll just find a new hobby or career, switch subject matter to maybe make a buck there. I think anyone who transitions from politics into culture would be the way to go. I've had this discussion a lot actually with a lot of my friends in my little ecosystem of mine, is that I really think that if you want to maintain any relevancy after this election cycle, you're going to have to transition to more normie friendly topics. Like, I don't consider this person right wing at all, but like I think that people are sleeping on the model of the YouTuber Feral Historian. I think he's a college professor. He's kind of has like this left libertarian vibe about him, but he talks about things that are distinctively in a lens that's not left wing, but also about pop culture. And I mean, he appears to be very Gen X or very older millennial. And it's just like, that's way more interesting to listen to this guy talk to me about a British TV show that almost no one's ever heard about, and talk about like the social commentary it had and how it's relevant to today, than it is for me to read like the 800th hot take on X headline that's going to be irrelevant in 2 weeks. And I guess that it's all down to what you want to specialize in. Do you want to specialize into like media review, content? And if you don't make it and the writing's on the wall, I mean, that's up to you, man. And I hope that this wasn't your sole source of income. And if it was, I don't know how you transition out of the content creator sphere into getting a real job kind of marketplace, because I know that there are people who have been doxxed or have been, put on hit lists, like for instance, I don't know how Patrick Casey ever stops doing what he does as a political commentator, because he's been on, the SPLC's website. He's been attacked by lefty and progressive causes, and I know that he's distanced himself from a lot of the stuff that he was formerly associated with, but it's just, I don't know how he gets like a job at a bank or at like an office job or something like that. The same thing for other content creators in Britain who I like and who have been doing this for years. It's just, you're on the hope not hate list forever. Like, I just don't know what you do in terms of getting a regular job. Like, it seems impossible. But that's the space I think a lot of people are going to have to recognize, is that if my sub count drops or my Patreon dollars go away, what do I do? It's not like the left where there's kind of a place I can bounce back from. I'm not Sora Bamari. I get fired from a journal. It's not like Unheard is going to hire me tomorrow. Like, it's just not going to be the case. I don't know. I think that's going to be an interesting question. And maybe people who've stopped doing this and then got a regular job. But for my end, I just see an ecosystem in flux where the winners have been picked, and they're going to start gatekeeping, because just like with immigration, every immigrant wants to be the last one on the boat who gets to shove the plank away so no one else can get on shore.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that it being more normie friendly is, I mean, it's not even about like radioactive topics. I think it's also in the weeds kind of things, right? Like the sort of internecine drama of what's going on X or, Instagram or whatever. Like, there's less of an appetite for that. And longevity is really going to come from being more accessible, not so accessible that you can't differentiate yourself. But I also think that people got a little arrogant about things loosening up, or maybe didn't know what that means. Like, let's say the Overton window has been shifted to the right a lot, right? that doesn't mean that every topic is cool, right? And that you could freely associate with anyone ever. Maybe it's a little bit more comfortable if you're a little out of the box, but there's still expectations, right? Like it doesn't mean anything goes. I have a suspicion that maybe Me Too style like cancellations are cooled off for a little bit, but um gatekeeping and yeah, cancellations as we knew them are here to stay, or will ramp up again. Um yeah, I mean, I agree with you. There's certain people where it's like, I don't know. There's people who, haven't been on SPLC lists or been targeted by Hope Not Hate, um, who I wonder, like, where do you go? And then there's like a whole class of people who aren't really on the right, but they're certainly not on the left. And I mean, the left isn't welcoming them back, and where the real money is on the right, they probably don't want to have anything to do with that for no other reason than like maybe they're not value aligned, or such and such a character isn't sufficiently Christian, or it seems maybe um sexually eccentric, or so, to use a kind of clumsy euphemism there.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of weird, yeah, there's going to be a lot of people left out. Maybe new tables will be made. I, I think it's very scary, and I do wonder a lot about people who um, got involved in things maybe they wish they hadn't, and it's too late. Like no one, like there's forgiveness, but how much forgiveness is there? Who knows?
Yeah, I've noticed this too, even on the left, where there has been, where all this post-election takes had taken place, and individuals are saying, well, maybe we need like a left-wing Joe Rogan. And then unironically, there were a lot of lefties in the replies that were saying, well, we had that, and it was called Chapo Trap House, and it was racist, transphobic, misogynistic, homophobic, it was rude and ableist. And it's just like, well, these guys probably agreed with you on like 99% of issues. They just said words like retarded, or they called things fake and gay, but they were still going to vote Democrat anyway. And it does kind of illustrate that, maybe these sort of purity tests are going to be a real stress breaker for who gets forgiven or let back in. I mean, there are plenty of people who wouldn't call themselves progressives or woke that I'm sure have some left-wing opinions that don't ever want to be called right wing. I mean, the last time that we saw sort of a left wing or non right wing but friendly with the right kind of group get called out was the Fed Post, and that podcast died the moment like that Vanity Fair article dropped. And two of those out of the three co-hosts still have a show, and they do things, and I like them a lot, and they're crypto communists, and they have no problem admitting that to you, but they're also not progressives either in the, I guess, quote unquote woke sense of the word. So I think that everyone's kind of just trying to find their place. And I mean, we saw this as soon as sort of like X relaxed its rules. Because I mean, what was happening was people were like, well, since I can do this with Twitter Premium, here's like the greatest story never told, or like Europa, the last battle, all 10 hours of it on X.com. And it's just like, well, this isn't really helping anybody now, is it, with respects to the media advertising scene, or not making this place look like a cesspool, and all the other reasons. So I think that the interesting drama, it's never going to go away. We've both been around long enough to know that. But at the same time, the lines that are being drawn in the sand is just going to be about who has the money to outlast the other camp, or to just be independently self-sufficient. And those islands are small, and everyone trying to run towards them either realizes maybe they've burned their bridges, or they've, burnt the ship that they were sailing on, settling on their own island, only to realize that their island has no fresh water or natural resources. So I think that that's definitely the case. But even now, I just simply feel as if everyone's in this great state of flux, because the election cycle's over. Everyone's kind of experiencing this, post-coital electoral clarity. And they're just like, oh, well, what do we do now? I guess, I don't know, start fights on Twitter, I guess. Like, start shit over a Wojak, I guess. And it feels very redundant, or almost just sort of just I'm tired of it and I want something interesting to happen. And we're all kind of enjoying this like society of spectacle when it comes to the news headlines. But I, if you already have an established, I guess, beat, for lack of a better word, and it's still relevant, then you're good to go. And I think people should have maybe seen the writing on the walls for that earlier this year. And I think people should have had a plan for what they're going to do after the election. And I mean, I definitely have a plan with that in mind. And I mean, it's more book focused, more literature focused, but it's not as if I'm not going to comment on current events, but I just know that, okay, things are going to be different because Trump will be in office and that things will not be as, open for me to whine and complain about, because it's not like Biden is in charge or, that administration. So the ecosystem's different.
I mean, I hope we're pleasantly surprised.
I hope
Where
so.
it's yeah, maybe we're being doomers here for no reason. I guess not for no reason,
I
but
don't.
maybe we're wrong.
Well, I don't know if I'm being a doomer about it. I maybe I haven't been around as long as others have, but to me at least, it's just that you saw in between election cycles, 2020, 2022, and now 2024, you saw these sort of like rise and fall of groups. And to me, it feels very cyclical history. It's a pattern I can kind of identify with and wrangle on to. And that to give credence back to what we were initially talking about, I think that there has been this sort of, for at least, I don't want to say everybody, because there's plenty of reasons to stay anonymous. I'm very pro anonymity. But, a lot of people have transitioned into, well, I've been doxxed, or I'm going to get ahead of the haters. I'm going to dox myself, Uh, Lomez has been was unfortunately doxxed by that odious Jason Wilson character, but also at the same time, he shows his face now on his Twitter profile, and there are other people who've embraced their looks and things like that, which I think on one hand is good, because if you're a political dissident, or you just don't have a mainstream opinion on everything, it's good to humanize yourself in the wake of trying to normalize whatever your beliefs are. But at the same time, like, they're also trying to build things that are not just pure political projects, although politics is kind of front and center, but they're also trying to find ways to make money, which is good, right? Because you're also doing cultural stuff and things like that with the conferences and so on. And that helps sort of create this cadre of networks that you can hopefully build a career out of, or, make good on relationships and things like that. But I don't know if it's doomerish to say that, like, oh, things will be different or things might not be good for everybody. You're absolutely right. We could both be wrong. And all of a sudden, under this new political paradigm, or this quote unquote realignment, that, things actually will be more open and, let 1,000, flowers bloom and things like that. But the realist in me says, no, there's going to be a lot of infighting. There's going to be a lot of seething camps and fighters that are all trying to make businesses or trying to make money and secure the bag before they think things go bad. And even for me, it's like, I don't know what happens after Trump and this whole era of politics of the last 10 years. I better do the smart thing and acquire wealth and a network, and try to be prepared for what comes afterwards, not just online, but in real life. And I think that a lot of people are thinking more about the future, especially as millennials get older. I do think that whole crisis of meaning is going to kick in, because this generation has been the most online, and it has played a large role in the discourse and how content is consumed on the internet, that for those that have embraced the, I guess, celebrity at being a lol cow, for lack of a better term, how do you cope with the fact that your whole past, your whole life is on display as this timeline and this record? And at the same time, if you went down even a further path that was self-destructive, and you've become, sort of a progressive or single cat lady, or deliberately not gotten married or with anything like that, what do you do with that other than project your existential crisis on the timeline? And I think that crisis of meaning is going to come where the mental health aspects are really going to come home to roost.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, that is thankfully, like the lol cow thing is relatively few people, right? Like how many lol cows exist in total? Let's say 1,000. You know, it's not that
I
many.
hope so. I hope it's less than that.
No, it's about. I would say it's about that. I mean, because how many image boards are there dedicated to discussing them? There's like the major one. Let's say there's about 1,000. That's not really that many people. Um, but I think there are a lot of people who've just spent a lot of time like being like unproductively online. And as you get older, I mean, it just that gets more miserable. Um, Thinking about the future, I mean, there's thinking about the future of like what's going to happen in the content game. But you're right, like what's going to happen in the physical world. And, people get older, they have health issues, they need friends. What happens? And that's another, that's an even more important question than you were on a dozen problematic podcasts in 2021. Now what, right? Like, what it's like you have no savings and health insurance. Now what is a bigger question than that. Um, and yeah, it's I mean it's if I wasn't being a doomer before, I mean that is something that I am really scared about. What does that look like when millennials who sort of have been keeping themselves going by saying it'll happen next year, it'll happen next year, it'll happen next year, start turning 40, start turning 50. What does that look like? I don't really know.
Well, I think that maybe the analog to that is going to be what happens to a young person who goes to like Los Angeles and Hollywood, like 21, like they go to college, right? They go to UCLA or they just try and make it big, and they do all they get the commercial, they think this will be their big break, and then they don't get it, they don't get it, they don't get it, they audition, nothing happens. And then what do? Well, either they settle for getting like a shitty job somewhere in the area and try and make do and find somebody, or they go back home. And I guess that might be what we see here. Like they just kind of go home, or they do something else, or they log off. And if they're anonymous, that's even easier, right? Because you're not. It's something that you can walk away from. Not if it's your name and face, and then it's everything about you, and then that's a big chunk of your identity, and it goes away. I think that's a question. I've jokingly, well, not jokingly, I say this with some genuine desire to do this, and although I don't know how feasible it is, but I would love to win the lottery and put some money aside, a couple $1 million, and find people who got doxxed or were just totally canceled from reality, and I would just love to like write them a check, like a pension, and I would call it like the old head pension fund, where it's just like, listen, you were a trailblazer in this like online space. Your discourse, your dialogue has changed the way that people think. Unfortunately, you got screwed over, and it was too late to rehabilitate your image. But here's this, like, I guess, like penance, this pittance that hopefully makes you feel better. Because I don't know how you're going to survive when you get older, because you can't do this for forever. And but I don't know, because I don't know if that social safety net doesn't really exist, and even our normal social safety nets, whether it's Social Security or otherwise, don't really take care of people to begin with as it is, and some of them are not likely to be solvent unless we do some serious budgetary changes and restraints. And so, again, I don't want to end this on a doomer note, but I just there's so many uncertainties, because so much of this is happening in real time that we haven't ever really seen before, because our real life analogs to these things were never all encompassing, never psychologically scarring, or so essential to one's identity that if you were to quit, what would you do? Like, I still get blown away by the fact that more people know me on this earth by this amphibious depiction of myself than in the real world. And like, that's a very strange thing to consider, in the world that we live in today. Like, that is an extension of the self. And what do you do when that's severed, or not making you any money, or you've been blacklisted because you've said some problematic things? And what do you do now? And that becomes the great identity crisis, I think, of the 2020s, is what do you do when all of your words have been said, and now people can kind of do their own version of the Last Judgment, But instead of Christ judging you, after you're dead, it's more of the public opinion judging you by your timeline. Because everyone can go read that unless you delete your tweets often.
And then what happens when AI scrapes that?
Oh, that's
Like
even worse.
there's already like
That's already
someone just
happening.
launched. Yes, I like it's called like omi.me or something, where it's just like you could talk to a Twitter persona with a free account and it just scrapes uh your public tweets and guesses what your personality is like based on that.
Yeah. Raises some uncomfortable questions about yeah. It's the Patrick Bateman, instead of returning some videotapes, I have to delete some tweets. I have to delete some things I've said online. Or I need to paywall some podcasts. But again, all of it happening in real time. It's it is much like the Western. What does the old gunslinger, what does the old shit poster do when people feel as if their time is come to an end? And I mean, in microcosm, I kind of witnessed that a little bit with all this, wife jack discourse, which is awful. But I noticed people who've been around, much longer than I have, saying like the spirit of 2016 lives on. I will be edgy. I will be transgressive. I don't care if I have to like say this behind a locked account. I have this clout. I'm going to finger wave and call you people losers and wife guys and da 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 da. And it feels almost spiteful. But at the same time, it's also sort of the strange, almost an older man looking down at the younger one saying, "You've gone soft." And I mean, that's a small, example in microcosm, but I do think that maybe that'll happen writ large, where it's like, oh, remember when we used to do like the confessional? Remember when we used to do the reply function on YouTube and things like that? Like those things will seem very old hat, and maybe they'll fade away in the same way we don't really talk about the Transcontinental Railroad anymore. But at the same time, what followed the Transcontinental Railroad was just like this great amount of trade and influx with the rest of the international community, and that'll definitely be the case. I mean, you already see this already with the racial conflicts that take place on X and on other social media platforms. And of course, there's plenty of social media and internet that you and I will never touch. And some of it is purposefully made that way by the nature of how they communicate. I find Japanese Twitter to be a really good example of that. They look at us oddly and strangely, in the same way that we kind of look at them. Like there's this weird Orientalism and Occidentalism that takes place between those two ecosystems, despite the fact there's very little overlap between the two. So, the frontier closes, but it will internationalize. But for people who are so focused on the imperial heartland, i.e., the United States, I think it's going to be just this sort of scramble for being lawmen or being part of the newspaper or something like that. For me, if I were to maintain my strivership, I know damn well that it's going to be, well, maybe I could make something out of this career-wise, but realistically, in the back of my head, I'm like, well, problematic things have been said. I don't think so. So it's like, well, you should balance out and maybe continue to do what you do for a living in the real world and don't try and make this a full-time gig. So I think that those are the existential economic crises that are going to emerge out of this. And I think that they will resolve themselves faster than we think.
I hope so, and I hope they resolve in a happy a happy way.
Yeah, are there any dark horse wild takes or predictions that you think might that we should keep an eye on?
That's a good question. I'm not I'm not sure. I do wonder. I mean, COVID was sort of a COVID was it was a black swan event. Is that what the is that a proper usage of the term? I mean,
Sure.
what
Yeah.
else like that will happen, right? Like we can make all these predictions about the internet, but we don't know what what other things will occur. I will say we don't have time to get into it now, but one thing that a friend of mine brought up the other day was there's like surprisingly like little analysis about children who grow up talking to devices, so like Alexa and Siri and things like that. and how that type of technology will expand and change things. And I think that's sort of worth maybe not getting too deep into, but sort of just putting a pin in, um, and paying attention to. Um, so I think there might be something there, this thing of just like being able to ask the air for a song or the weather, and what that does to one's psychology.
Mm. Yeah, I think the big discourse I've been following isn't been so much around natalism itself, but around child rearing, because there's a lot of parents who, at least on the right that I talk to, are very kind of just very limited screen time, and then there are others that are very pro screen time. And I think that I've jokingly said that it's sort of this neurological speciation between like the iPad baby that you see in like the Walmart, carriage, and then the parents that are like, no, you will listen to Beethoven and you will not touch a computer screen unless it's like supervised and at a desktop computer. And I think that that's a big thing that people are going to have to look at, because I think that one of the big conversations I've seen right now has been the utter hatred and people advocating for like total cocoa melon death, and how awful it is, and how it's like meant to get your child addicted and conditioned for the music and whatnot. I think that that's a huge thing that people will have to look for in the frontier, is like, okay, the internet's not going anywhere. YouTube's not going anywhere for the time being, unless there is like a black swan event where YouTube just like dies and Google chucks it or whatever. But I think that the whole aspect of raising kids in this environment is going to be the big thing that everyone talks about. And I think it's going to be some millennials that have like flashbacks to Lemon Party or shock videos and like, no, 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 don't look at that. But it's like, it doesn't matter, because if I at 12 years old could have seen the worst shit imaginable out of Afghanistan on the internet without parental supervision, I can't imagine what it's going to be like for your children and what they're going to encounter and what they're going to have to deal with. And if this Elsa Gate stuff and all that other stuff is any example, that I think is the big thing to focus on, is going to be child rearing, not just the children speaking into devices. I think that's what it's going to be about.
Yeah, and and there's only so much you could do within your own home. You have to
Yeah.
screen people's friends. Um, yeah, I agree. There's definitely going to be like the iPad kid versus the like neo Luddite, like, you know, we're ultra involved parents, and then there's probably whole years of people who aren't going to have kids at all. Um, yeah, the future is what do they say? The past is a foreign country. So is the future.
Mm.
The future is
Oh,
a scary place.
I mean, it's scary, but it's also really exciting to see what happens, because you're right. The people who don't have children, what do they do? And I think that the election meltdown videos that everyone likes to point and laugh at, I think that that's just an example of what's to come. Because what does someone who has lived their entire life online do when they wake up one day and they realize they're all alone, and that maybe what they believed in, and I think that this kind of goes hand in hand with the detransition stuff, is what do you do when you wake up one day and you realize everything you've been told is a lie? Like, the social resources for those kinds of people have been so fundamentally destroyed. I mean, like in the past, widowers or people who were single for whatever reason or ill or whatever, they had the church, or they had the social welfare system or communities that would take care of them, or in more barbaric cases they were just left to die. I don't know what you do outside of maybe finding like I don't know, like a spinster support group on Facebook or whatever, and trying to like have meetups and stuff like that. I think that that's something to also look into, is what do you do for the vast, not vast, but a good chunk of the population, because marriage rates have collapsed. Like, what do those people do? And that'll be another frontier to consider, is sort of just like the geriatric care space for people who have grown up online and are now entering their 60s and 70s and getting older. I think that that'll be something to look at for sure.
I mean, is it a coincidence that assisted suicide is sort of I don't even want to go there. I'm not the
Well,
first
I
one to
think
say.
that I think a lot of that just has to do with the fact that neoliberalism, or whatever you want to call like our current welfare capitalism state, would rather off you to keep the system going rather than to do anything about correcting itself. I think that there are some left-wing econ takes that are, I don't think that are just like left-wing. I think they're just objectively correct, that the system we have would rather kill you than try to take care of you or correct itself or fix or reform itself. But yeah, that's a whole other rabbit hole that we could spend a whole hour and a half talking into like we have today. But I don't want to take up too much more of your time, so I'm going to simply say, Katherine Dee, where can people find you, and what are you working on?
They can find me on default.blog, and I am working on a series of essays, which might have been something to bring up earlier, about internet overexposure syndrome. So, how does too much internet impact your brain?
Mm. I'm very interested in listening to that for sure, because I think that the impact will be a very harsh form of auto amputation, as McLuhan wrote about it. Like I wrote this essay a while back about the whole phrase "nothing ever happens." I think it's a form of auto amputation where you don't want to be exposed to new variables about your worldview and how you model the events of the world. So people just say, "Oh, nothing ever happens," so they don't have to compute with new things going on in the news. So, but I'm very curious to see what that's like. But also, you've were you also part of that whole book that I was asking you about earlier, or is that just something you're promoting? The whole e-girl book.
Oh no, I made it.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. I was curious because I saw other accounts. I saw you retweeting it from a different account. I didn't know if it was yours or not, but I was like, I felt very my inner Icarus was like, I should fly too close to the sun. I should read that and review it because I'm very. I don't talk to many women on Twitter just out of the fact that I don't want to get caught up in drama, but also there's like 5 women I follow and you're one of them, and it's just like I'm curious, but also like to me it would be more of an anthropology thing, but yeah, it's good to know that you were part of it.
Yeah, so it's just it's an illustrated timeline.
Mm.
And so this edition, so I came out on Meta Label. It's called E-Girl, and it's going to be a series. And so the first issue is illustrations of different E-Girls, with a pretty detailed timeline from 1980. I think it was starts 1982 up until this year. And then each subsequent issue is like zooming in on the timeline. And then altogether, it's sort of a portrait of the e-girl and how she developed.
Well, I have a gut feeling that I'm probably going to end up buying a copy anyway. So, but again, Katherine, thank you so much for coming on. I will have your links down below in the description to where people can find you on X, default.blog, and all the other wonderful work that you do. It is always fun to talk to the co-host of my co-host. Uh, so, and it's a weird podcasting polycule, dare I say, to make a terrible joke as we close out here. But again, Katherine, thank you so much for coming on. I greatly appreciate the time that you took out of your day to come chat with me about the future of the internet.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Anytime.
All right, cool.